Hey guys, and welcome back to SM Sports Radio for what is a pretty big milestone for us here at episode 20, almost half a year of SM Sports Radio, which is, like you said, pretty crazy to think about, but got a pretty good show for you guys today. We're starting out with our ACC Season Preview, then we're going to talk about some of the teams that we think might be the best to rebuild for the new College Football 25 game, and then going to finish it off with some MLB stuff, talking about the All-Star rosters, and then our winner and loser of the week for this week. But how are you doing this week, Samuel?
Doing very well. Excited to be with you once again for episode 20, which once again is another great milestone for us to hit, and I hope we have 20 more and then 20 more after that, and it just keeps on going.
Yeah, hopefully. That definitely would be great. I would love to be able to keep this going as long as possible, but we're right in your wheelhouse today as we start talking about the ACC season.
It just means less, baby.
Yeah, just means less in the All-Coast Conference now with Cal and Stanford, and the Gulf Coast almost with SMU. But let's dive into some of the teams that a lot of people are saying might be towards the top of the conference this year. We're going to compare their schedules, kind of see who we think is going to come out on top at the end of the season. You guys probably already know who Samuel's going to go with for that, but we'll see what I have to say at least for some of these teams. But the team we're looking at first is the Florida State Seminoles, who were there's pretty famous what happened to them at the end of last year, being left out of the college football playoff. The entire fan base now hates Kirk Herbstreit, but we'll see if they can rebound this year. And they start the season with a pretty easy game in Georgia Tech, although weird location and matchup for week one Florida State.
Dublin, Ireland. So that'll be a very interesting game. I've enjoyed these kind of overseas games, but they haven't really made for great football games. I don't know if the travel and the jet lag really takes a toll on these players' bodies or
I don't know if
you've
watched the Euros, but it's the fact that everyone in England can't score right now.
Yeah, that's also true, but I know, I can't remember if it was last season or 2 seasons ago, Nebraska and Northwestern started off the season overseas, and that was one of the worst games I've ever watched.
That was so bad, yeah.
So
some of it's the matchups
hopefully
too.
it's a better game. I think Georgia Tech's trending in the right direction.
Definitely.
I don't think they quite have the firepower to keep up with a team like Florida State. That
you dare underestimate Haynes King?
Well, I will definitely be pulling for Georgia Tech in this instance, but I don't think they have the firepower to keep up with an FSU team that just seems like reloads in the transfer portal every single year. And Mike Norvell's kind of made a name for himself on the national stage, although they were left out of the playoff. I feel like he's a guy that is pretty well respected nationally in terms of college football coaches, and I think Florida State's going to be ready to go despite playing many miles away from home here.
Yeah, I definitely think they get an easy Week 1 win. I think they beat Boston College as well, especially getting that team at home. I think it's a pretty easy Week 2 win. Week 3, they get Memphis at home, Mike Norvell versus his former team in the Memphis Tigers, although I don't think Memphis will have nearly enough for FSU. This is not the same FSU that lost at home to Jacksonville State. This is a much better FSU team now. I think they take care of Cal in Week 4 pretty easily. Then the first interesting game of the year for me is at SMU, and I do think they win that game, but I think that's a close game.
Yeah, it's going to be close. I didn't know too much about SMU last season, so I actually watched the SMU BC Pinstripes Bowl. That was kind of the first measuring stick to see how SMU stacked up with an ACC school in Boston College. While a pretty weak team, SMU was able to win that game pretty easily. And so I think SMU is going to be one of those teams this season that kind of finds itself at the top of the middle of the pack, or maybe even towards the top of the conference this season with a pretty favorable schedule that we'll get into a little bit later. And the fact that this game is in Dallas, Texas, I think FSU is going to have to bring their A game.
Yeah, definitely. And Rhett Lashey's done a great job at SMU so far. I think he's definitely going to have this team ready to go. I think the talent on the Florida State side is just a bit too much in this game, honestly. So 5-0 start, but I think it ends there. I think this, I know you're probably going to agree with this, but I think this Clemson team just the defense is so good, and there is just no way in my mind that Clemson loses to a team quarterbacked by DJ Uiagalelei. I just don't see a way where that happens.
I'm very glad that I'm not the only one who feels that way. Clemson is going to come in with I think it's pretty universally agreed Clemson's going to have a top 5 defense in college football next year. I would have them personally in my top 3. A little biased there, I will admit. But you said it, the fact that DJ Uiagalelei is the quarterback for FSU, I think even if there's a little bit of a talent discrepancy in favor of Florida State, I think the mental aspect, I know it probably doesn't mean as much as it's made out to make, but I think the mental toll that this is going to take on DJ Uyunglele is great, and I think that Clemson's going to come in pretty pissed off coming off of an 8-4 season last year, and this is their first opportunity to really make a statement, because let's just be honest, they're probably not beating Georgia week 1.
No.
So you don't want to drop that game and then drop this game, because then you're looking at being pretty much on the brink of not being able to be a college football playoff team if you drop both of those games. So I think I'm going to give Clemson the edge here as well. No surprise there.
Yeah, and one thing that really stands out to me about this game is the young receiver talent you're always talking about with Clemson and the new guys that they have coming in. Florida State lost their best 2 corners by far in Renardo Green and Jerry and Jones to the draft. So this is going to be a young, inexperienced Florida State cornerback group versus these young, highly talented Clemson receivers. And I don't know. At this point, I don't know how much I trust Cade Klubnik, but I think the receivers for Clemson will definitely have an advantage in this game versus the DBs of Florida State just because of that. I know both are inexperienced, but I feel like it's easier to be an inexperienced receiver than it is an inexperienced corner.
Yeah,
so
we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into Clemson, but I know I have a lot of thoughts about all of that in terms of Clemson's side of things, but we're in agreement that FSU probably drops this game at home.
Yeah. Then they go to Durham, North Carolina to take on Duke. No more Riley Leonard for Duke. I think Florida State wins this pretty easily because Riley Leonard was kind of the only thing keeping Duke together for a lot of the season when he wasn't hurt. So
yeah, I walked into Duke to Wallace Wade Stadium on a Monday night, actually Labor Day night of my freshman year of college, and walked in not expecting to see what transpired there on the field. Riley Leonard ran all over us and turned the ball over a few times. Drove home
from 8 a.m. class.
Drove home after a 28-7 loss. Drove home 4.5 hours. Got home at about 4:15 in the morning, and made my 8 a.m. Spanish class. So
round of applause.
Might be an academic weapon right here. I would click the round of applause button, but I forgot which one it is, and I don't want to look stupid. So just imagine that you're hearing a round of applause.
Academic weapon and hit the wrong button.
That would be very poor on my part.
Yeah. Then Florida State travels down to Coral Gables, Florida, to take on Miami.
Raucous environment there. I don't know how they're going to handle the crowd.
No. But I think Florida State gets this one done pretty easily. I think Miami, at this point in the season, it really depends on what you get from Cam Ward. Yeah. If Cam Ward can carry this Miami team, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I think they do have upside. I just think the Florida State defense is going to be so talented. Mike Norvell's a great coach, and I trust Mike Norvell a lot more than I trust Mario Cristobal, so I think Mike Norvell gets that done. So still only one loss for Florida State on the board for both of us. Then they get UNC at home. This is not last year's UNC with Drake May. This is a disaster waiting to happen for the Tar Heels.
UNC, if this says anything about UNC, they're not even going to be previewed in this segment. We have no respect for 2024 North Carolina football.
If it wasn't for Drake May, I think UNC would have won 3 games last year.
I'm in agreement there.
Then their next game, they head up to South Bend, Indiana to take on Notre Dame in what for me is a coin flip of a game. We have seen DJ Uyunglele play in South Bend, Indiana
twice.
Before. Yeah, so
lost both.
I don't think that changes, honestly.
I don't either.
I think it's a coin flip, but I would lean Notre Dame in this game because Riley Leonard is a very good quarterback for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I know they basically lost every receiver on the team to the portal, but I think the defense for Notre Dame is good enough to win this game. So 2 losses for Florida State for both of us.
And that's an environment that we've been in, we've experienced, and
let me tell you,
it's a pretty underrated atmosphere. I think it's a pretty tough place to play.
Which, as I know it's a cliche, but not a bad seat in the house in that place.
No,
we were sitting at the end zone, almost all the way up at the top.
I think
it felt like we were almost on the field.
From the top.
Yeah. So shout out Notre Dame Stadium. Great place to go. And then obviously 3rd loss of the year to Charleston Southern at home. No. Easily take care of business there as well. Then this is a head versus heart pick for me at the end of the year with the rivalry game, Florida versus Florida State. I think the Florida offense is definitely good enough to hang with Florida State. I just think the defense is so bad that it's going to let the team down in this game. Although I do think that there is a world where Florida wins. I just don't think it's this year.
It's very dependent on how Florida's season has gone up to this point. If this is a game where, if Florida's 8-4 or 8-3 coming to this game, and would be 9-3, which would mean
With that schedule,
you're talking about a college football
team.
playoff at-large berth. If that's on the line for Florida, give me the Gators in this game against DJ Uyunglele and Florida State. But all likelihood points to the fact that Florida's probably 5-6, 6-5, somewhere in there. And so I'm probably going to have to lean Florida State. I would undoubtedly pick Florida if this game was in the Swamp, just because I'm not as high on Florida State this season as some others are. But I do think Florida State gets their 10th win here and goes 10-2.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you about 10-2. So maybe that'll be good enough for a college football playoff berth with the expanded format this year for the Seminoles. But next, let's talk about a team that we both think is kind of going under the radar, and that is the Virginia Tech Hokies.
Yeah, and going under the radar not only because of their young talent, their quarterback, Kyron Drones, not just because of their coach. This schedule is kind of a joke.
Yeah, let's go through it right quick. They start off at Vanderbilt, easy wins. Marshall in Virginia Tech Stadium, in Virginia Tech. Marshall, not a prayer. They play at Old Dominion, which they have had trouble with in the past, but I don't think that happens this year.
Redemption.
Yes, pretty easy 3-0. They get Rutgers at home. Rutgers is not like awful Rutgers, but they're still not very good. I think that's 4-0. At Miami is, I think, the first difficult game for them. I think that I don't think Kyron Drones is better than Cam Ward, but I think the rest of the Virginia Tech team there's enough gap between them and the rest of the Miami team outside of Cam Ward for Virginia Tech to pull this out. I do think it's very, very close, though.
Yeah, I'd love to offer some contradictory thoughts, but I'm in full agreement there. So I think we still have Virginia Tech undefeated up to this point.
Yeah, then they travel to Palo Alto, California for a conference game versus Stanford, which, wow. But I think they win that pretty easily as well. Then they welcome Boston College to town. I think that's a pretty easy win for the Hokies. They get Georgia Tech at home. Potential trap game here. I think the Georgia Tech offense is definitely good enough to come in and at least give Virginia Tech a fight. I think Virginia Tech still pulls it out, though.
I'm in agreement there.
Then they get Syracuse in the raucous crowd at the newly remodeled Carrier Dome. I don't know how many of you are going to get that reference, but I think Virginia Tech wins that game as well. Then Clemson at Virginia Tech is going to be a very entertaining game, I think, because you could very well have an undefeated matchup if Clemson somehow gets a win over Georgia at the start of the year. But if not, you could, I think, also very easily have a matchup between an undefeated Virginia Tech team and a one-loss Clemson team for the 1 seed in the ACC at this point.
Right.
So I think it's going to be an incredible game. I think Clemson, the talent, especially on defense, I think you've seen this with Clemson teams so many times where they go into a hostile environment and you're like, is Clemson going to be able to pull off this win in this big spot? And the defense is so good for these Clemson teams, it just takes the home crowd out of these games a lot of the time. And I think
you
that's
just
what
watch 3 and out after 3 and out, and you can't really get loud on defense anymore because even if you get a stop, your offense is probably going to be 3 and out once again against this elite Clemson defense. So
I think that's one of the main reasons Clemson's been so good over the years is because when you can go into a hostile environment and just take the crowd out of it like that, you're going to have a lot easier time on the road. So I think they do that here. I think they hand Virginia Tech their first loss of the season. I think Virginia Tech wins at Duke in the second to last week of the year. And then I think they take care of business versus a Virginia team that they frankly owned. So that is 11-1 for Virginia Tech.
And honestly, I don't think the ACC is going to be a good enough league to get 2 bids. I think they have to beat Clemson to make the college football playoff, unless there's a rematch in the ACC championship between these two teams.
So you think that if Clemson makes the ACC title game and Virginia Tech also makes it at 11-1, let's say they lose.
Okay, if Clemson loses
twice,
I think Clemson gets in.
Let's say Virginia Tech loses to Clemson twice and they're both by 7 or less. Do you think that team is still left out?
They are, because what's their signature win? If Miami's as down as we think they're going to be,
true.
Compared to expectations, there's just not a signature win on this schedule.
It's Florida State all over again.
And that's why the Clemson game, they have to win that game if they want to go to the college football playoff.
It's crazy to say.
That's just how it is. Unless they lose to Clemson at home and then beat them in Charlotte, which I don't think that's a very likely scenario.
If you're going to beat Clemson, you have to beat them at your home field.
Yeah. So I personally think the ACC is a 1-bid league, and that Virginia Tech Clemson game may very well help to decide which ACC team is going to be representing in the college football playoff.
I completely agree with that. And the next team we're going to talk about is the NC State Wolfpack, or as they are otherwise known, 8-4. They take on Western Carolina first. I think that's a pretty easy win for them, obviously. Then they welcome Tennessee, and this is, I think, when we are going to find out what kind of season we're going to get from Nico Iamaleava as Tennessee's starting quarterback. If he comes into this environment and has a great game, I think all of a sudden Tennessee looks a lot scarier for the rest of the season. I don't see it happening. NC State's a very underrated environment as well. I think they win this game, especially this early in the season.
And already confirmed as a night game, so you know Carter Finley Stadium is going to be losing its mind. And we talked about kind of with Avery Johnson when we were looking at the Kansas State schedule, how they don't really face much tough competition until he really has a chance to settle in. That's not the case here with Tennessee.
Yeah.
Nico's not. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I know I'm going to butcher it.
Iamaleava.
Nico Iamaleava is not going to have had games under his belt, especially road games, to where he's been able to go into a hostile environment and lead his team to victory. And I think this is going to be a really tough test week 2. I think it's a little too early to really trust in a guy like Nico to come in and win on the road, especially in an environment like Carter Finley Stadium.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Then easy wins versus Louisiana Tech for NC State in week 3. I don't think the game at Clemson is close.
I think it's going to be close because it, for some reason, always is with NC State. But Clemson wins this game.
I don't see how NC State's going to move the ball in this game.
Yeah.
And if you can't move the ball, I don't think how the game's going to be close. So
True.
Then they get Northern Illinois at home for some reason in week 5. That's a pretty easy win as well, in my opinion. Wake Forest is terrible, another easy win. Syracuse is terrible, another easy win. Then they travel out to Berkeley to take on Cal. I think they get that done. But I think this is a sneaky game purely because Cal has a guy named Jaden Ott, which if you haven't heard of him, you're going to by the end of the year. He's a great running back. Probably one of the best 10 in the country, honestly. And if Cal's offense is going to have any success this year, it's going to be off Jaden Ott. And NC State, I think, just that long of a road trip at this point in the season, I think you could maybe have a trap game here. I still think they're the better team. I still think they win, but definitely a trap game here, in my opinion, versus Cal. And then I think they take care of Stanford pretty easily the next week, though.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on both of those. I think you bring up a great point about how that long of a road trip, or in this case, a plane ride, this late in the season, late October, as it's on October 19th. I think the physical toll that takes on the players is going to be something to look at, and I think that if Cal turns NC State over on their first possession, goes up by a couple scores, and then can just feed Jaden Ott, I think that's their path to victory. I don't really see that happening per se in a realistic world. I think NC State probably gets it done here, but I think it's going to be close, just like you said. And then once again, I think they beat Stanford, and then going down those last 3 games, it's kind of tough to find losses for NC State. So
there isn't. They lose to Georgia Tech and Atlanta.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think they beat Duke. I think they beat what's going to be an awful UNC team. But I think that at this point in the year, Haynes King is going to be dialed, and I think they lose to Georgia Tech.
Thursday night game too.
Yeah, Thursday night in Georgia Tech versus Haynes King and what's going to be a pretty good Georgia Tech offense. I think they lose that game
on ESPN as well.
Yeah, so that's what 10-2 for NC State as well.
Yes.
So it's looking like we're going to have a pretty top-heavy ACC this year.
For sure.
Then what might be the most intriguing team on this list, and that is the SMU Mustangs next.
Best uniforms in the ACC right here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The SMU uniforms are just some of the best in all of college football, not even just the ACC.
Right.
They start the year with a trip out to Nevada. I think that's a pretty easy win.
I agree.
Then they take on Houston Christian. Shout out Jalix Hunt, edge rusher this past draft at a Houston Christian. Not much else notable about them outside of that, to be honest, but I think SMU takes care of them as well. I think the BYU game at home is fairly easy for them. TCU is awful. I think they take care of TCU easily. That's 4-0. We've kind of already talked about this Florida State game where we think this could be really close, but I think this is where SMU goes to 4-1 personally. But
I agree.
Very close game, probably. Then a trip to Louisville. This isn't the same Louisville team you saw last year. I think SMU gets this done on the road, honestly.
I actually think Louisville wins this game.
Really?
I think Jeff Brom has this program headed in the right direction. I think Louisville's another team that's going to kind of be in the middle of the pack ACC-wise, but I think they're flying under the radar a little bit. A pretty good team that had a tough start or a tough end of the season in that bowl game against Southern Cal, in which their new quarterback kind of torched them a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think Louisville's good enough to win this game at home. So this is finally our first disagreement. We have
my concern is
Louisville here.
The SMU offense is so high powered. I know Louisville has a solid defense. That's definitely the strong point of this Louisville team is the defense. But if the defense falters, I just don't think Louisville can keep up with SMU.
That's fair enough. It's fair enough.
So we'll have to see what happens. But October 5th is when that game is. Then SMU travels to Stanford for what, again, is somehow a conference game between these two teams. Stanford's bad. That's really all I need to know.
Right.
SMU takes care of that. Then SMU at Duke, I think, is potentially intriguing, but I think that they have a much better chance of winning that than Louisville. I think Duke's a much worse team, so I think SMU gets that done. Pitt at SMU is just another weird game to look at. So many of these games, I'm like, what is happening here? But I think they beat Pitt. Although the Boston College game for me is, I want to hear your thoughts on this Boston College game because I think this could be one of the more intriguing matchups of SMU's schedule this season.
I think the fact that it's in Dallas, Texas, I'm not sure I can trust Boston College to walk into Gerald Ford Stadium and win this game. I feel like Boston College is one of those teams. Obviously, we saw what Thomas Castellanos can do last season at home against Florida State, which they almost pulled off that upset.
That's what makes this game so interesting to me.
Yeah, that it's definitely going to be interesting. I just can't remember the last time Boston College went into someone else's stadium and won a big game. I love Thomas Castellanos. I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the ACC, maybe top 3.
The rest of his team
definitely
is just
really
so bad.
Good. But yeah, like you said, not many weapons surrounding him there, and
it's kind of the extreme version of Cam Ward in Miami, is this Boston College team with Thomas Castellanos at the helm. But SMU the weakness of that team is the defense, and I think if you get into a shootout, Thomas Castellanos is the kind of guy that can maybe pull you over the top in a shootout. I still think SMU wins it. I still think SMU wins it. I just think that's probably their most intriguing game down the stretch here on the schedule. I think they beat Virginia. I think they beat Cal.
So then you would have them at 11-1. I would have them at 10-2. I wonder what the tiebreaker situation is if it's Clemson, Virginia Tech, SMU all at 11-1.
Which
because
also, let's talk about the fact
SMU doesn't play either of those teams.
Let's talk about the fact that we have SMU, or at least I have SMU and Virginia Tech at 11-1, and I have Florida State at 10-2.
Right.
If you're Florida State going into this season, and a season where you think you can maybe even run the table and be a college football national championship contender.
No, that's not even what they think. That fan base expects to run the table.
What happens if you're 10-2 and 4th in the conference to SMU and Virginia Tech?
Tough luck.
I don't know.
Better enjoy the Pop-Tart Bowl because that's where you'll be headed.
Yeah, that's as crazy as that is to say. Then the big one here is the Clemson Tigers, the next team we'll be talking about. Obviously, it's a huge Week 1 game versus the Georgia Bulldogs. And as much as I like the upside of this Clemson team, I don't think Week 1 Cade Klubnik is a quarterback that can beat Georgia, especially in Atlanta. This is not a neutral site game. It's in Atlanta, Georgia.
Right. And I think I would change the wording there a little bit. I think Cade Klubnik can help Clemson to victory and win this game because he won't really have to do all that much for Clemson to win, in my opinion. What the hinge point in this game is going to be, can Clemson turn Georgia over a couple times? If Clemson wins the turnover margin and is able to just feed film off of the ball and spread out the field, get Cade Klubnik into these checkdowns with these talented receivers that we've talked about. This season, you're going to see Antonio Williams really break out in college football. He's going to be a third-year guy who has shown flashes his first 2 seasons, battled some injuries. We saw what true freshman Tyler Brown could do last season. He's going to have a year under his belt. He's going to be a sophomore. Troy Stellato on the outside is also going to be a guy in the mix. Jake Brenningstool, a pass catcher at tight end. You're going to see new guys in Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore, true freshmen, coming in. They're going to be contributors Week 1. I firmly believe that. And then you're even gonna have guys like Cole Turner thrown back into the fold, Adam Randall thrown back into the fold. That's a pretty deep wide receiver room for a Clemson program whose weakness over the past few seasons has been, quite frankly, wide receiver wide receiver play, offensive line play,
especially route running ability,
quarterback play.
Receivers.
But the thing about it is, when you have these deep wide receiver rooms, you can keep guys fresh against a team like Georgia, and you can give guys breathers when they need them. And so Cade Klubnik's not just going to have to force feed one guy all game. He's going to be able to spread the field out. So in a world where Clemson is able to turn Georgia over, win the turnover margin, I don't think Klubnik really has to be all that spectacular for them to win the game. But in reality, I don't really think Clemson's going to win the turnover margin. I think you're going to have to force fumbles to do that. I think Klubnik's probably going to turn it over at least one time. I think we can probably bank on that at this point in his career. I do think he takes a big step this year. This is a game that I see Georgia winning somewhere around 27-17 or 24-14. I don't think it's going to be an absolute blowout. If it is, Clemson fans, buckle up for another pretty rough season, in my opinion. If you get blown out by Georgia week 1 with as good of a defense as you have on paper, you're in trouble. Yeah, I think the 27-17 mark is a score I'd probably agree with. You mentioned the turnover battle. I think if you're going to cause turnovers versus this Georgia team, it's going to have to be on the ground because Carson Beck is too good, in my opinion, to force him into a ton of mistakes. And it's going to have to come from the likes of Peter Woods. It's going to have to come from the likes of T.J. Parker. If you're going to get an interception or a strip in the secondary, it's going to come from Khalil Barnes, the sophomore who has been a turnover machine in his limited action. He's so fun to watch. His freshman year, so he's definitely a guy to watch. He's going to be a leader of the defense, especially in the secondary. But I think we can both agree that Clemson probably starts out the season 0-1. Yeah, I think they moved to 1-1 though. Although known upset team App State coming to town, I just think Clemson is good enough to. Fun fact: App State's quarterback this season will be Billy Wiles, who actually began his career with the Clemson Tigers. Well, App State is just a Clemson transfer quarterback farm, formerly Chase Bryce there, who won in A&M, the toughest place to play in college football. Shout out to Chase Bryce there. First night game in Death Valley since last year FAU. Before that, it's been so long. So really haven't had a huge matchup at night in years for Clemson. So hopefully Clemson gets a night game against South Carolina because it looks like that's their only candidate. If Louisville comes in undefeated, I think you can maybe get one Louisville. Yeah, maybe Louisville. So hopefully for my sake, we get some Clemson night games this season. This night game against App State, it's going to be fun just because it's a night game. It's not going to be very fun for App State. No. So 1-1. We've already mentioned the NC State game, our thoughts on that game. Then I think they beat Stanford by at least 40, honestly. Stanford's so bad. Yeah. I don't think Stanford has anything for Clemson at all. Their only weapon's Eric Illuminor. He's not going to be able to get anything going versus Clemson, I don't think. Stanford just will not be able to move the ball, and their defense is also atrocious. Then we've talked about Clemson going down to Tallahassee. Our thoughts on that game as well. We both mentioned we don't think a Clemson team loses to a team quarterback by DJ Uiagalelei. And let's revisit last season because as good as Florida State was and as bad as Clemson was, I don't know if this speaks more to the Clemson-Florida State recent history of matchups or if it speaks more to the atmosphere at Death Valley. Either way, I'd be fine if you want to argue it either way because like we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think Death Valley or Memorial Stadium. I'll let LSU be the default Death Valley for now against my will, but
they need to schedule a home and home and see what happens. Winter.
We actually have one. My junior and senior year,
nice.
We have a home and home just for the battle of the real Death Valley.
Nice.
Anyway, back to Clemson, Florida State. You revisit last year's game. It took a disaster for Florida State to beat Clemson. Clemson was leading 24-17, driving down the field in the either late third or early fourth to go up by 2 touchdowns. And Jared Verse strip sacks Cade Klubnik. They take it down for a touchdown. All of a sudden, it's a tie game. And even then, it took Clemson's kicker and Jonathan White's missing a 29-yard field goal to win the game. And even beyond that, it still took overtime for FSU to beat Clemson. So a lot of national pundits that are college football experts and college football gurus, a lot of them that I've been reading give the edge to Florida State here. I just don't understand how you can, one, watch last year's game, 2, compare these two rosters on paper.
Florida State got worse and Clemson got better over the offseason.
Florida State loses Jordan Travis and goes to DJ Uiagalelei, and that is a gargantuan gap that people will realize, and FSU fans, you will realize that is a bigger gap than you're expecting. People talk about how much better DJ Uyunglele was at Oregon State, how much better
throw the ball.
How much better of a fit it was. Not only did he not have to throw the ball, he put up pretty much identical stats. So
the Oregon State defense and run game was just so good it covered.
I don't know if you just didn't watch those games or if you only looked at the scoreboard, but DJ Uyunglele is still not a good quarterback. Not only do you lose Jordan Travis, you lose Johnny Wilson, you lose Keon Coleman, you lose the 2 corners that Micah mentioned,
Renardo Green and Jerry Jones,
a little bit ago.
You also lose Jared Verse.
Right. Just you lose so much, and
Braden Fisk.
Clemson brings back a lot of guys, is going to be improved on offense, is going to be the same or better on defense. I just don't see how it's not like at best for Florida State, I see this 60-40 in favor of Clemson. At worst, I could see 70-30 in favor of Clemson. So I'm gonna go with Clemson by double digits in this game, actually.
I don't hate that, honestly. Then they have a very easy 2-game stretch here. If they lose either of these, I would be flabbergasted. Where at Wake Forest and Virginia at home.
They get a nice game in a library on October 12th at Wake Forest.
Yeah, really. That's going to be.
If we had a top 10 least tough or easiest places to play, I think Wake Forest makes that.
Something about black and gold teams, because Vandy would make that list as well. But
for sure.
Then Louisville coming into town, I think that is one of the ones that potentially you could see a team come in and maybe keep it close, but I think Clemson wins that game.
And it might be a trap game, not just in the case that you're like overlooking Louisville, but
looking ahead to
you're going to be
Tech.
circling this matchup in Blacksburg to the point that Clemson players might kind of overlook Louisville, not because they think they're a bad team, but because they're like, oh man, we better bring our A game next
Virginia
week.
Tech, yeah.
But I do think Dabo Swinney's going to have them focused on Louisville here, and I think Clemson wins this game pretty easily once again.
Yeah, then we've already talked about this Virginia Tech environment a lot. A game that
hopefully a game
we will
will
both be at. Yeah, so that should be super exciting. A stadium that's always been on my bucket list to go to.
Please be a night game.
Yeah, Inter Sandman at night would hit so incredibly hard, but hopefully we end up there. Then Clemson at Pittsburgh. We know the history between these two teams, but this is not the same quality of Pittsburgh team this year.
Kenny Pickett's not there and James Conner's not there. That's enough for me. We win.
Yeah, Clemson gets this done pretty easily. I think they obliterate the Citadel. And then this last game here, so many South Carolina fans, after South Carolina won in Clemson, are like, oh, we're not losing to Clemson again. This is the start of another streak versus Clemson. You think all the Clemson football players have not heard that over the last couple of years? They're not sick of hearing about how South Carolina won in Death Valley. If this game is closer than 35, I will be shocked.
Once again, South Carolina, just be grateful that you won in 2022. It took another disaster of a game. That was the worst quarterback Clemson game I have seen in my lifetime with DJ Uyunglele's atrocious performance. It took 3 turnovers, a 9 for 19 stat line or maybe it was 9 for 29, one of the two, by DJ Uyunglele, less than 125 passing yards. And Clemson, if they field the punt return with under 1:30 to play without fumbling, I still think Clemson kicks a field goal and wins that game as well. You beat us by 1 point with another disaster. This is going to be a beat down.
Yeah, I would fully expect that as well. So condolences in advance, South Carolina, for that one. So we both have Clemson at 11-1 in all likelihood, with the only loss to Georgia. If you do that, then you win the ACC championship game. Well, obviously, if you win the ACC championship game, you're in auto bid. But I think just on its own too, that 11-1.
Do you think if Clemson's 11-1 and they lose the ACC championship game, they're 11-2 to a team that they already beat on the schedule, either Florida State or Virginia Tech, do they still get in?
Yeah, I think there's.
I think that is the only scenario that the ACC gets 2 teams in.
Yeah,
because of the name recognition of Clemson,
especially if they lose close to Georgia.
Right.
Yeah,
definitely a team that we would probably put in our college football playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. Then next we have the Miami Hurricanes, who are starting 0-1 after a loss in Gainesville to the Florida Gators. I will not hear an argument. I don't care how good Cam Ward is. The rest of your team is not good enough to go into Gainesville and win a game. It's just not. The Florida offense is just as good, if not better, as the Miami offense, and both of our defenses are terrible. I think the Florida home crowd is definitely... This is the first time we've gotten Miami at home in over a decade. You think Florida is not going to be hyped up and ready to go for this game?
And this is like the drop off from Cam Ward to Graham Mertz isn't as big as people.
It's not big. Graham Mertz was a
say.
top 6 quarterback in the SEC
Agreed.
last season.
Agreed.
Graham Mertz is so good. I know there's no Trevor Etienne, but Montrell Johnson is so good behind him as well. And he was the number 1 back. Let's not forget that. He was the number 1 back. Then Eugene Wilson, Trey Wilson, freshman All-American last season. Dude is so good. Let me tell you, Miami does not have a guy that can cover Trey Wilson.
No.
They don't. I think Florida gets this done, and Miami, I think you have an immediate letdown to start the year, which nothing new.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. 0-1. They get 3 easy games right after that.
2.5.
A&M.
At South Florida is not a cakewalk.
I didn't see the at.
At South Florida is not a cakewalk. I think that's a potential trap game there. We've mentioned the Virginia Tech game already. Both think Virginia Tech gets it done
so we got
down there.
3-2 there.
Yeah. Then at Cal, if you don't win at Cal, burn everything to the ground.
I think they win at Cal.
I know Jaden Ott is good. He's not an entire team. I think they lose at Louisville.
Agreed.
So
I'm glad we're in agreement.
3 losses there already for Miami. Florida State, we've talked about that game.
4
losses. I think they beat Duke at home.
5-4 in Georgia.
I think they lose
Tech.
at Georgia Tech.
They might.
They
just might.
We talk about the drop off Cam Ward to Graham Mertz. Cam Ward to Haynes King is bigger, but it's not a huge gulf there either. So I think they lose at Georgia Tech.
We all know what happened in the Miami-Georgia Tech game last year. Don't let that happen again.
Goodness. Then they get Wake Forest at home and at Syracuse. I think they win both of those games pretty easily. So what is that, 5?
7-5?
7-5?
Wow. Dude, Miami fans would be so pissed if they spent all this money to get Cam Ward and they go 7-5.
Well, I don't know how much Oregon football you guys are familiar with, but Mario Cristobal at Oregon was great at recruiting talent and then not utilizing it. He made Justin Herbert look like a slightly above average game manager in his career at Oregon. So if you do that with Justin Herbert, what are you even going to get out of Cam Ward is my concern for a Mario Cristobal team, but I don't know. So 7-5 for Miami, and yikes.
The Colorado of the ACC, as you like to call them.
Yes, exactly. So we have Clemson in the ACC title game, and I would agree probably winning that game.
Yeah.
Then we have, weirdly enough, one of SMU or Virginia Tech maybe in second if SMU doesn't tie with Florida State there. So some weird tiebreaker stuff to work out in those 3. But if you would have told me if you'd told me at the start of last season that in a year's time SMU would be in the ACC and I would think they could tie for second.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about and to put into words, but definitely a very top-heavy ACC. We kind of figured that was going to be the case. Even NC State, we could see a path for them to Charlotte as well.
Well, just a lot of these ACC teams, I feel like this is a fairly wide-open conference where it's kind of like the Big 12. You feel like many teams have a shot to win that, but that's kind of our thoughts on where the ACC could go this season. Now, let's talk about some more College Football 25 content. I know that we always love talking about this, and this week we've got some of the top teams to rebuild on the game. Let's start with the Power 4, and let's start with the Big 10, and a team that is, I know, close to your heart, and I think is set up so well, and that is the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You get Dylan Raiola at quarterback. You get a very dedicated, great fan base. You can recruit kids to come to the middle of nowhere, a lot of corn out there in Nebraska, and with the new Big 10, how it's looking now, you could build up a great little program there, getting wins over Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Southern Cal,
Washington.
Washington.
Beat those teams, you find yourself in the top 5, top 10 pretty quick.
Yeah, so I think this is a great power conference rebuild in Nebraska. I think it's going to be super fun.
And you get 3 to 4 years of Dylan Raiola, which you already mentioned, but like he's going to be a true freshman. If you can
recruit receivers to go with him, that's going to be super exciting.
Or even work the transfer portal.
Ooh, you can DM some guys from other schools. Yeah. Go out there, just DM Tez Johnson. You want to come eat corn over to Nebraska? See what happens there. Then the Big 12, it's going to be Arizona State. Some of the best uniforms in all of college football. A team that for many years now has been a disaster organization-wise at the top and just coaching, people running the program, and now you come in, you kick all those people out, you say, we're running this program the right way. We're going to, well, I say the right way. They can still do some shady dealings with the NIL in this game, but at least you can maybe bring Arizona to the top of Big 12.
Elite party school, so you can sell recruits.
Yes, you can sell recruits on
that
the party school.
As well.
You can bring out all your Lamborghinis like Texas did. And no, Arizona State, vast resources.
Yes.
But I think, especially in a conference as wide open as the Big 12, you're set up for future success there pretty easily if you can get a real recruiting hotbed going. And speaking of recruiting hotbeds, for the ACC, it is going to be the Cal Golden Bears. You get Jaden Ott for the first couple years of your rebuild, and then you get the giant talent bed that is California to recruit from.
Absolutely. And shout out to my guy, Easton Keys, who is the Easton on Twitch. He's actually been doing a Cal rebuild on NCAA 14 revamped, so that's been pretty fun to follow along with. So, Easton, you brought Cal to the front of my mind for the ACC, and just echoing what Micah said, Jaden Ott is a very fun player both to watch and to play with. So, Cal is a great candidate for the ACC.
Let me tell you, I found out about Jaden Ott in the worst way at the Auburn game last year out in Cal. But then our final Power 4 conference team is going to be U of SC in South Carolina in the SEC. And we didn't want to just go Vanderbilt because I feel like everyone, when they look at SEC rebuild, is going to say Vanderbilt. But South Carolina, other than that one kind of blip year, they've been bad for a while now, since the days of Connor Shaw and Marcus Lattimore, and they have pretty good uniforms down there too. I wish they would switch to Nike, because I would love to see what Nike could do with that kind of color palette there. But
and they're the University of Vibes, so
yeah, they are.
That's their thing down there.
Yes. Then a great home environment in Willie B, an absolute fun place to play, and with all the stuff that's in the game about home environments that they've tried to make accurate.
We know Sandstorm's in the game.
Walking out to Sandstorm on your NCAA Dynasty's got to be pretty sick.
Yeah, so I know the South Carolina fans are going to be waving their towels with their controller in their other hand.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting.
I think that's honestly my personal favorite power conference rebuild, actually, I would have to say, is South Carolina. But
I won't go that far. It's a good rebuild. I can't say it's my favorite.
I know you can, but I will. I will say
there you go.
Then for the independents, there's only 3 teams, and one of them are the UConn Huskies. And with how UConn basketball is, with how UConn baseball is, why not make them an everything school? For a team that's been so bad, they've finally provided another NFL prospect this year in offensive guard Christian Hayes. So maybe you build up the O-line pipeline.
And here's the big
NFL.
question: if you select UConn as your team, you're going to rebuild. Do you join a conference?
I think so. Since conference realignment is going to be a thing, I think what you do, honestly, this is what I'm going to be doing on my personal dynasty, is I'm resurrecting the Pac-12, sending all those teams back out there. I'm bringing UConn into the Big Ten. I'm sending West Virginia to the ACC. I'm remaking the old Big 12 with Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, sending those teams back out there. We're going old school, but so that's personally what I would do, and I think if you could make a UConn Big Ten dynasty, that would be super fun.
I think if I were to make a UConn dynasty, I would have to put them, if I were going to put them into a conference, I think it would have to be the Big 12, just because of the basketball aspect of things. I know it's a football dynasty, but the Big 12 is already so good in basketball that I'm just going to pretend that I'm the president of UConn, the athletic director of UConn, and I'm thinking about basketball, who's just been dominant over the past couple seasons.
Dude, Houston versus UConn in the Big 12 every year.
Oh, man.
Amazing. But
throw in Arizona in there, Baylor.
Yeah. Talk about a basketball
Take me back to college basketball season, please.
Just a few more months.
Yes.
Just a few more months. Then for our group of 5 rebuilds, we're going to start off with FAU, which I don't know if you've seen the FAU alternate uniforms. If you haven't, they'll be on the screen right now. But those are, in my opinion, the best uniforms in college football as far as an individual uniform
owls on
set.
the top. Very nice.
Those look so good. And then just that, plus you get Florida to recruit from down there at FAU. I think that's a very fun rebuild prospect for sure.
Yeah, and one of the best locations you could get down there in Florida. I think it's Boca Raton, right?
Yeah, formerly a Lane Kiffin location.
Yeah,
so
the Lane train made it stop there. FAU, another school that's been decent at basketball the past couple seasons, and great location, another great state to recruit from, like you said, and really cool uniform. So that's pretty much all you can ask for in an ideal rebuild in a really bad team. So
yeah, next it has to be Kennesaw State. First year in the FBS, and then 2, the fact that we know that for recruiting, there are actual subdivisions and locations within state, so you get to recruit the Atlanta metro area,
which is the mecca of college football.
Yeah,
if you
so I think that's super exciting. Get into that. You can build them up through the Sun Belt, eventually take over the SEC with Kennesaw State, and some great uniforms for Kennesaw State too. I think this is such an exciting rebuild, although you've probably heard that a million times.
Yeah, everyone and their mother is going to be using Kennesaw State.
And then speaking of K-State teams, let's move on to the MAC, where it is Kent State. Now, a lot of people might think it's Akron, because Akron Akron's terrible. Well, guess what? Kent State was worse. They were worse than Akron last season. So why not take former Nick Saban location, Kent State?
Yes, great pull there.
Yes, to a MAC title. And then eventually I think your goal with Kent State is to end up running the Big 12 at some point, which...
Unfortunately, not a good basketball school here. The MAC doesn't have much good basketball.
Maybe the basketball will rise with the football as you bring them to prosperity. Bring back the NCAA basketball game while you're at it.
Please.
That would be
Take
amazing.
all my money.
Yeah. Then out in the Mountain West, more basketball. Speaking of the Mountain West, a team that actually was knocked out by the Clemson Tigers this year, and that is the New Mexico Lobos. I think that it's a very exciting team. New Mexico State kind of on the rise right now. Why not join them?
Decent rivalry.
Why not join them as New Mexico and really run the Mountain West? Then I guess you'd be looking to run the Big 12 there too, although in my fantasy world, you'd be running the resurrected Pac-12.
There you go.
But we'll see what happens with them. I think they're at least a decent uniform set as well. Not the best, I would say.
Good mascot, the Lobos.
Yeah, good mascot. And then finally, what might be actually my favorite team on this entire list in the American is East Carolina. Some of the best overall uniform sets in the entirety of college football. They have a rabid baseball fan base down there at ECU. I think if you can bring the football program up there, you can expect the same amount of fan support from the ECU faithful, the Pirates. What a great mascot down there. Then you can eventually, maybe Clemson and Florida State leave to the SEC, and maybe you as the ECU Pirates come and start running to ACC in a couple years once you build them up. So I think that is the last team that really would appeal to me on this game. So those are 10 teams, and we have been thinking, we've decided we're going to make SM Sports Radio Connected Dynasty on the game that we will be updating you guys on each week. And so I believe Samuel has made a random generator wheel here. So what we're going to be doing now is spinning this wheel of 10 teams we've just told you about for which team we will be using in that Connected Dynasty. So what we're going to do first is eliminate a team that neither one of us are going to be using.
Let's see who's going to be eliminated. Who's it going to be? It is going to be the Cal Golden Bears. So
Rip Cal. That's fair enough, though. Let Easton do his thing with Cal.
Easton continue his dynasty with Cal, and he can have control of the Cal Golden Bears.
So now your team. I really hope this is South Carolina because that would be hilarious.
No, please no. My team in the Connected Dynasty for SM Sports Radio.
He's hoping for Nebraska. Give him New Mexico because I don't want to use him.
Lobos. Yes. I will take it.
That was the team I wanted the least on the entire wheel. So Samuel will be taking the New Mexico Lobos to glory of the SM Sports Radio Dynasty. Now, let's eliminate one more team before we pick mine here.
Who will Micah not be using?
Please eliminate UConn. Oh, it's gone with my favorite on the entire thing.
South Carolina.
U of SC.
Goodbye, South Carolina. And now is the time to pick your team.
Let's see who I will be using.
The team Micah Farmer will be using in the SM Sports Radio Connected Dynasty.
Watch it be UConn.
Kennesaw State.
Let's go. Okay.
Micah has struck gold here.
I am so psyched. Kennesaw State is about to absolutely run the country on this Connected Dynasty. And I'm just glad we got two teams at similar levels here.
Yeah.
You will get the New Mexico Lobos, and I will be taking the Kennesaw State Golden Eagles to glory. And I'm super excited for this to start. I'm so ready for the game to come out. I was telling Samuel, I'm so ready for the game to come out that when I fell asleep last night, I had a dream that I got the game on early access, which is just ridiculous at this point. But I am super excited for this game to come out. I know we both are. I know a lot of you guys are super excited for it as well.
Another fun aspect there, we're going to be heading to Atlanta to watch the Braves and Reds play 3 times here in a couple weeks. And in the downtime between games, you already know what we're going to be doing. We're going to be playing College Football 25. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of fun dynasties together with numerous other people as well. But this is going to be a fun one to kind of update the people on. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Reds Braves. With that, let's transition over into the MLB. And let's start with our winner and loser of the week. So who is your winner of the week? My winner of the week is actually an executive, and he is actually the general manager of the Atlanta Braves, and his name is Alex Anthopoulos. And I'll just let you hear me out for a little bit. Alex Anthopoulos had, to some people, a quiet offseason. He made one big splash, and that was Chris Sale. Traded Vaughn Grissom straight up. Nothing else, no compensation, nothing like that. Vaughn Grissom to the Boston Red Sox. The Boston Red Sox send Chris Sale. Chris Sale this week was named an All-Star. And I think
Grissom was not.
I think is probably would be in contention to start the NL All-Star game. I know there are a lot of names that you could maybe throw in there. I don't think he's going to throw in this case because I think he's going to be lined up to start next Monday. That's the first aspect of why Alex Anthopoulos is the winner of the week. The second aspect is the fact that he made another move that went way more under the radar. Oh, and going back to Chris Sale, by the way, the Boston Red Sox are paying Chris Sale's salary this season. The Braves are paying him no money.
They're paying the salary.
Yes.
Haha, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Another move that went under the radar this year is actually Major League Baseball's ERA leader in Reynaldo Lopez, who keeps going back and forth between being a qualified pitcher by innings. He's kind of misses the threshold a few days after his start. Then when he starts again, he's back qualified. So he's probably qualified for a couple more days. Then he'll be disqualified from these lists for a while. But currently has a 1.72 ERA. Has been absolutely incredible as a starter. First time starting in his career in quite a while. He spent a few seasons in the Detroit Tigers bullpen and has really revitalized his career. So another great move by Alex Anthopoulos. And number 3, Marcell Ozuna is an All-Star for the Atlanta Braves. So three All-Stars. This was another decision that Alex Anthopoulos had to make last season. Was he going to cut Marcell Ozuna? He decided not to, and Ozuna has rewarded him. The second half of 2023 and the first half of 2024 have been really special for Marcell Ozuna. And a little bonus I'll throw in, not necessarily because he's a great player, but because it makes the lineup more aesthetically pleasing and it brings back good vibes. Welcome back, Eddie Rosario, to the Atlanta Braves.
Yes.
So my winner of the week is Alex Anthopoulos.
Yeah, he's made a lot of Braves fans happy recently with some of the moves. I think that Eddie Rosario, as you say, is great for vibes, at least, if nothing else, and I'm curious to see what he can do for y'all. My winner of the week, no one should be surprised. It's Wyatt Langford. Slash line of 462, 533 on base, and a 769 slug for an OPS over 1,200, which is absolutely absurd for Wyatt.
Not mistaken, he had a pretty nice catch, too.
Yeah, he did. He robbed a home run. He's had multiple outfield assists. The dude is running the Rangers right now, and somehow Marcus Semien gets an All-Star. I don't know. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Wyatt Langford has been so incredibly good for the Rangers over the last couple weeks, really making a run at that AL Rookie of the Year. And at this point, if he keeps putting up these numbers, how do you not give it to him?
Yeah, I think you might have to. And you hit the nail on the head preseason. Your AL Rookie of the Year pick was Wyatt Langford, and I think he's trending in that direction every day. If he keeps stacking weeks like this past week, he would run away with it. But I think even if he kind of levels it out a little bit, I think he's definitely going to be in the conversation. So it's a great call there.
Yeah, he's been incredible. I've been super excited to see it. And as for my loser of the week, we talked about Rookie of the Year a little bit. How about last year's NL Rookie of the Year in Corbin Carroll, who is just ice cold right now? His last 7 games, he's hitting 188 with an on-base at 235 and a slug at 375. His last 15 games, in 57 at-bats, he's hitting 175 with an on-base at 242 and a slugging under 300 at 298 for an OPS that is just barely crossing the 500 mark, which, yikes.
Yeah, major yikes. I was not expecting this much of a sophomore slump from Corbin Carroll. I thought that he was going to be one of those guys that kind of rose to superstar status this season for the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Pretty much everyone expected that, and instead it's just been...
It's been awful.
A meteoric rise. It's been a meteoric.
It's not even that it's been like. It's not even that it's been like a really tough start. Like this is 88, 89 games we're talking about here, in which Corbin Carroll has been awful. I know he's the loser of the week, but he's been pretty terrible all season.
Yeah, his season average is 210. His season OPS is 615.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's been a rough year for Corbin Carroll. I really hope he can get it turned around because he's such a fun player when he's doing well. So hope to see Carroll turn it around. But that is my loser of the week. And who have you gone with?
My loser of the week is Bo Bichette. And
is it for the Twitter stalker?
We can throw that in there as well. He's had some off the field issues as well. It's kind of a twofold loser of the week. It's Bo Bichette and it's also the Toronto Blue Jays because of Bo Bichette's performance. It's going to be really hard to trade him. In the last week, he has seen 23 at-bats. In those 23 at-bats, he has a 130 average, a 192 on base, and a 217 slug.
I did not realize it was that bad. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad.
A guy who's a prime candidate, or who was a prime candidate, a guy I've been advocating for the Braves to trade for. Maybe pump the brakes on that one a little bit. I don't think we need another guy with an extremely low OPS into a lineup that's already been underperforming all season. So Bo Bichette, you either must really love Toronto and not want to leave, or the pressure of getting out of Toronto has been a little bit too much. He is my loser of the week. 9 strikeouts in those 23 at-bats, just 2 RBIs and 2 runs. 3 hits.
It's been
not
really
good.
It's been really rough for him, but that's our winner and loser for this week. And now the last little bit of the pod here, we're going to run through our reactions to the AL and NL All-Star lineups. We're not going to go through every player and say, because we'd be here for another 3 hours, but just some guys that we were maybe questioning if they deserve to be All-Stars after this point in the year. And I know I mentioned him already, but the one guy that immediately stands out to me is Marcus Semien. How on earth has he ended up on an All-Star team?
I'm not really sure. And it's not really, we can't make the argument that, or maybe we can. Is there another Texas Ranger that made the All-Star game?
Let's see. I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Okay, no, they did. So Kirby Yates. So it's not even the fact that Texas has to have an All-Star and you throw Semien in there. Semien has done nothing this season to warrant an All-Star appearance.
Let's quickly pull up Marcus Semien here for the 2024 season. He's hitting .229 with an OPS at .673. In no world is that an All-Star. In no world.
Oh, that's egregious.
It's a lot of name value there. He's been so bad this season. I don't think he's an All-Star. I think you wouldn't say that's an All-Star.
No.
At all by any means. But the worst thing across either league to me is Pete Alonso making the roster as a reserve when Christian Walker of the Arizona Diamondbacks was not brought to the All-Star game at all. I don't understand how you do that. I know Pete Alonso has done pretty okay this season, at least for the Mets, but Christian Walker, remember, was a guy that I wanted to give an All-Star starting spot to for a couple weeks before Vlad Jr. and Bryce Harper really got their numbers back going. But Pete Alonso on the season has a .240 average, a .780 OPS, and 18 home runs, which, don't get me wrong,
Walker's better in every statistic. I have him pulled up right
Christian
here.
Walker is better. He has 22 home runs, an average at .268, OPS at .853. The only number where Pete Alonso is even equal with Christian Walker is stolen bases at 2. And in every single other statistical category, Christian Walker is just way better than Pete Alonso.
I wonder if it was a deal to where they were like, all right, Pete, if you'll come back and play the home run derby, defend your crown, try to go for a 3rd home run derby, we'll put you in the All-Star game and hope nobody notices. But Mike over here notices. I noticed. Well, it's not like very bad.
It's not like Arizona had an influx of All-Stars, so they couldn't give him another one. The only one is Ketel Marte, who granted is a starter, but that is the worst thing to me on the entire list. And one guy I am glad they put in was Fernando Tatis Jr. He was my honorable mention, where I was like, I hope they can find a spot for him for my Player of the Month thing. But then also, how is Trey Turner starting at shortstop in the National League with all the
barely played talent? Any games too? And I've seen a lot of Mets fans complaining that Lindor is not there. You don't have an argument for Lindor. Lindor has been atrocious offensively once again. He's heated up a little bit here in the back half of the first half, but other than his greatness defensively, he's not been that great.
If Pete Alonso's an All-Star, I would argue Lindor is much better.
We've already established that Alonso shouldn't be an All-Star.
And to me, if you're going to put a Met in the All-Star game, I think it's Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah,
I don't get how Brandon Nimmo's not here.
Agreed.
I think that's another absolute robbery, but the fact that Trey Turner is starting when Mookie Betts is a reserve, C.J. Abrams is a reserve, Ellie De La Cruz is a reserve, all these great shortstops on the bench, and Trey Turner is starting. It's like Marcus Semien again with the
missed a month and a half with a hamstring.
It can't even be name value because Mookie Betts isn't starting. I don't know, but that and then the Pete Alonso thing are the two worst in my mind across either league. Honestly, the pitching looks okay to me on both sides. I don't see any huge flaws with the pitching rosters. The one thing I would say is I'm kind of disappointed that the guy who's been right up there, if not leading the NL in the entire year for reliever Ks, in Fernando Cruz of the Cincinnati Reds, I'm kind of upset that he's been left off, but the NL just has so many good relievers this year. I don't really know who deserves to be kicked off for him because all these guys are great. Ryan Helsley has been a save machine. Jeff Hoffman's had an exceptional whip and ERA all year, as has Matt Strahm. Tanner Scott is the only good Miami Marlin, so he kind of has to have a spot. And then Robert Suarez had that insane streak of batters retired earlier in the year. So I don't know how you kick off any of these guys. It's just kind of disappointing not to see Fernando Cruz there. But other than that,
he still has a shot because a lot of these pitchers will end up declining their invitation. So I think Cruz is a guy that you could see getting a call. I
just want to see him strike out a guy on the ridiculous fork ball in the All-Star game because it's nasty. But other than that, I feel like this is one of the better years, honestly, for All-Star game lineups.
It feels like the fans didn't really hijack it as much as they have some years in the past. We talked about a few years ago how Kansas City just absolutely took over. How about the Kansas City Royals with 5 All-Stars this season?
Yeah, and honestly, like we said, all deserving. Bobby Witt, there's no way you can leave him out. Salvador Perez, he and Adley Rutschman have been 1A, 1B all year for AL catchers.
Or just 4, just 4.
Yeah, then Seth Lugo. You guys know how I feel about Seth Lugo. I've been saying he's great all season. And then Cole Reagans, the strikeout numbers for him are definitely good enough to warrant that.
My preseason AL Cy Young, who is not going to get there because it's going to be Tarek Skubal, but still cool.
Listen, my guy wasn't even an All-Star. I had Luis Castillo. How did I manage to pick the one Mariners pitcher that is not doing well?
I don't know. That's crazy.
Anyway, that's kind of our thoughts on these All-Star lineups, unless there's anything else that stood out to you wanted to mention. But that is it for this week of SM Sports Radio. We will be back next week talking about the guys in the Home Run Derby, how that went, and I believe that episode will be out after the All-Star game, but the All-Star game will happen after we record. So don't know how much we'll be talking about the All-Star game next week, but we'll have more to talk about with the college football game, more to talk about as far as players we think you should look out for college football next season, or this coming season actually, but that will all be on the show next week, so we will see you guys then.